After a number of days in town, we headed out for 2 side trips by car. The first stop was the Palace of Versailles. I was struck by the scale of the place. Awe is the term that comes to mind, as I lack the historical background to really appreciate the meaning of the building and the things that took place here. While I was fairly well educated in U.S. history, and even knew a bit of English history, European history was unknown to me. One of the things that makes Versailles a poor palace visit is the lack of furniture. The French don't seem to really want to restore the place to its 18th century grandeur. Perhaps it is the politics of royalty. As you can guess from the expression on Steve's face, the day was hot and the gardens were boring. They only play the fountains once a month, and this was not the day. Well, you see one palace, you've seen them all. That was my opinion of our next stop at Napoleon's home at Fontainebleau. However, it should be said that this site was furnished. We were particularly taken at the size of his magnificent bed. Now, the emperor was a man of small stature, but this must have been small even for him. We then learned that people at that time slept in a semi-reclining position with their upper bodies supported by pillows. Now the bed made more sense. Now it was time to head south to make our grand loop of countries. About 100 miles southeast of Paris is the town of Dijon. We stopped for lunch. I don't know what we ate, but I'm quite sure it involved mustard. This is in contrast to a meal we had at the end of our trip as we were returning to Paris. Then we stopped at the snail capital of the world, Sens. The fare that day was escargot. By mid-afternoon we pulled into Geneva, Switzerland. As luck would have it, they were celebrating Fête de Genève. This is a 2-week-long city festival to commemorate Swiss Confederation. We sat on the porch of our hotel and watched a parade of people in their native dress of the various cantons of Switzerland. Geneva is a city of great beauty. The lake, water jet, and mountains all go to making this a great introduction to this alpine country. However, the huge mountains of the Alps lie further to the east. They will be described in detail in a few minutes. I got my first taste of cheese fondue one night in an old cellar restaurant in the heart of the city within a few feet of Lake Geneva. I loved it. One of the most interesting sites we visited was the League of Nations building just outside of town. They call the building now the United Nations building to reflect the new landlord. It seems that the League did not have the cachet that the UN had in 1957. With this visit, we wrapped up our stay in western Switzerland and headed out along the north shore of Lake Geneva. Here is the alpine scenery one is apt to see in central Switzerland. Along with the real Alps, we moved into German-speaking country. I made my second purchase here in the interior. This was a small figurine of a St. Bernard dog. It too graced my dresser at home, along with the English troops. Steve bought a bird whistle that he still has. One sad loss occurred on the road. We had just finished carving a watermelon with my Swiss Army knife. I had had this knife for a little over a year and carried it everywhere. During this roadside picnic, the knife was knocked over the retaining wall and fell hundreds of feet into the valley below. It would be 40 years before I replaced it. We were headed to the small town of Interlaken, where we would take a train ride up into the mountains. There is a cogwheel railway tour which takes you on a day trip to the Jungfrau Mountain. Here is a picture of me at the top of a place called the Jungfrau Joch. I am looking fit, but that does not describe what I looked like just a few minutes earlier. When the train stopped at the Ice Palace station, we were at the 11,300-foot level. When I got off, I immediately ran around crazy, got into a snowball fight, and generally made a fool of myself. Then the altitude hit me. I felt dizzy, nauseous, and generally punk. Here is Dad against the tranquil setting of the mountains. Looks are deceiving. A few months earlier, a climber was killed scaling the sheer wall of the Eiger Peak. His body was left dangling for years as it was deemed too dangerous to retrieve his body. From our position on the Jungfraujoch, we could see this gruesome sight. Dressed as we were, we could not really stand outside, as this image suggests. It was just too cold for that. For those who were not affected by the altitude, you could rent skates. Then you could take a few turns around the ice palace. The train trip took all day. From Interlaken, the train makes a number of stops. It is the only means of vehicular transportation for many of the mountain villages. We could, if we wished, to put in an overnight stay in Kleinscheidegg, but we were on a tight schedule and this was not possible. Note that the town, in this picture, also notes the Bridal Veil Falls in the background. Because Switzerland was not directly involved in World War II, it has retained a number of medieval artifacts in its towns and villages. This is the bridge in Lucerne. It is called Kappelbrook, or Chapel Bridge. Due to its wooden construction, it has been built, or rebuilt, many times. Just out of sight at the end of this bridge is a wonderful restaurant called Wildermann. It features German-style cuisine of central Switzerland. Walking around Lucerne, you cannot help but get the feeling you have been moved back in time. But speaking of time, we got back in our car and headed for the last of our countries, Italy. Travel in Switzerland in those days was slow, so we stayed overnight in Lugano. This town, in Italian-speaking southeastern Switzerland, was much more like the Po Valley of Italy than this alpine nation. The next day we pulled into the public parking lot across the lagoon from Venice. Leaving our car behind, we took the Valpretto to our hotel. These motor launches are the waterborne buses of public transportation in town. After slumming a bit in the Alps, we were back to first-class accommodations in Venice. Our digs were the Hotel Danieli on the Grand Canal. This five-star hotel was once a residence of the Doge, the head honcho when Venice was a city-state. To this day, the Danieli is one of the best hotels in town. As you can see, my brother really got into the spirit of this water world. The dock shown here was the boat landing of our hotel.